Hello, I'm Samantha from the Makespace. You can find our patterns at www.themakespace.uk. Today's video we're going to be sewing the ultimate shoulder bag, and I've got two versions here for you to have a look at. I absolutely love this bag. It is a great size, very practical and super quick to make. Really easy. We've got a separate base so you can add some contrast in. We've got a beautiful large flap. You can add some embroidery or a contrast panel, whatever you like. Inside we've got a zip pocket at the top there, a long slip pocket which I've divided, and I'll show you how to do that in the video. And then on the other panel we've got a full width slip pocket which I've divided into two pieces there. We've got a separate base inside the lining as well, so if you want a contrast base inside you can have that. The pattern comes with a fixed length strap, and here's what size the bag is on me. Oh, right in front of the other bag, that's no good. This is how big the bag is on me. It's got a good size length shoulder strap there, but you can always change that. You can change it out for a crossbody strap if you prefer. Have a look at my Patreon channel, patreon.com/bagoneer, for how to change your strap into different strap options, different pocket options. I've made one here with an adjustable strap. Other than that, it's exactly the same. I've added a bit of a feature flower to my flap. It's a great size flap to be able to do that. And then inside, exactly the same. I've got a zip pocket, a slip pocket, and then on the other side I've used my exterior fabric for that full width slip pocket in there as well. And then my base, I've used the same fabric, but again it's a separate base. I absolutely love this pattern. It's quick, it's easy. It only takes a metre of fabric or a yard of fabric if you're working in imperial. There's only 2 rectangle rings, 1 magnetic snap, but you can add lots of bling. You can add label, you can add a different fastening, you can add feet, whatever you want to do to this pattern. It's a real good starting point. So why don't you grab your materials and let's get sewing. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add our stabiliser. So what I've done is I've added my Decaville light onto my foam. You can just see it there. Just ignore this slightly wonky bit. I kind of ran out of foam a little bit. So you've cut your Decaville light 1/2 inch smaller. So just centre it on top of your foam and fuse it on. And then what we're going to do is sandwich that in between our foam and our exterior fabric. So I'm using this kind of mottled vinyl. So I've got my foam, Decaville light, and then I'm adding my exterior fabric on top, sandwiching that Decaville light in between my foam and my fabric. Okay, if you're using regular cotton you can use pins for this, but because I'm using a vinyl I'm just going to use some clips. So we're going to baste this into place using our longest stitch length, and we're going to use a 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance, because the regular seam allowance for this bag is 3/8 inch or 1 centimetre. So we need to go inside the seam allowance. So I'm just changing my stitch length up to its longest stitch length, and then I'm just going to whiz around all 4 sides at a 1/4 inch or 6mm. Start with my needle down so that I can pivot at the corners. So as I come to the corner, I'm just going to leave my needle down, lift my presser foot, pivot, lower my presser foot and carry on. Just going around all 4 sides. Oh, I've gone a bit too far. Just reverse a bit. Got a bit carried away there. Okay. So there's no need to back stitch on this because this is just a basting stitch to hold everything in place while we're working with it. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to the other side and pull this foam back. So I'm pulling my vinyl back away from the foam, and I'm just going to trim the foam as close to that seam line as I can, so that I'm just reducing that extra bit of bulk out of the seam allowance. I'm working on the base part here because it's a nice easy small rectangle I can get on the camera there. I'm just whizzing along. I've got my scissors kind of held at a bit of an angle, almost flat. Okay. Okay. Right, so that's my base ready. I've also done the same on my main panels, my exterior main panels. So I've added my Decaville light to my foam, sandwiched it, basted it on and trimmed it. And then on both my main panels, and then on my flap, there's no Decaville light in this, just the foam. So all I've done is base the foam on and trim it out of the way. Okay, so your stabilizers are done and ready to go. So I'm going to pop those to one side for later, and we need to retrieve one of our pockets, my lining pocket, and one main panel. So one lining main panel. Pop that to one side for the minute. Oh, I better put my clips away. I'm trying really hard to be tidy this year, but it's not going so well. Okay, now if you had read the pattern and follow the pattern, you would have your centres marked at this point already. Those of you who have watched one of my video tutorials before will know that I am notoriously terrible for marking my centres and always fail to do it, regardless of how many times I promise that I will change my ways and start marking my centres. I'm still terrible at doing it. Go on then, let's mark all of them. So I'm just marking the centres of my pocket and my lining main panel. Now we're going to pop the pocket right side down onto the lining main panel, but first of all we're going to draw a box, and this will be the box for our zip opening, for our zip pocket. We're going to pop this box, actually I won't give you the measurements because they're all in the pattern. If I give you the measurements then I'll probably confuse things and get them wrong, and I've marked my centres on the wrong side and then have to repeat them. Usually when I'm making a bag I have to repeat to myself over and over and over and over. So say I read 1 inch, I say right, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch. So I'll try and minimize confusion by leaving those in the pattern, and you can have a look at those as you go. Right, so the bottom line is there, and then we're going 1 inch in from each edge, or 2.5 centimeters if you're working in metric, and then the height of the box is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. Now if you've got directional fabric, you'll want to have your print upside down at this point. Okay, I'm not using directional fabric because it's so much easier not to, isn't it? Right, then we're going to pop this right sides together on top of our lining main panel. And again, the measurements are all in the pattern there. Do you know, the only thing I've forgotten to do is draw my little triangle in each end and my line in the middle. Here we go. Pretend that I did that earlier. Right, so let's pop this with the centres lined up. Again, the measurements for this will be in the pattern. Just lining up my centres there and give that a nice little smooth, and then I'm going to pin that into place just on each side there. Okay, beautiful. Right, just following the pattern to make sure that I don't forget to tell you anything. So now we're going to change our stitch length back down to our regular stitch length, whatever that is on your machine, that's fine. And we're going to sew around the outside of this box. So I think that the least obvious places are there and there to start and stop. So I'm going to start my top stitch in there. So I'm going to start this stitching up here, and we're going to start with our needle down if you can. Sew to the corner, leave your needle down, lift your presser foot, pivot, sew to this corner, do the same, and all the way around. If you find that you're getting close to the corners but you can't quite make it, then lower your stitch length right down so you can get nice and accurate into those corners, and then you can always raise your stitch length again on the straights. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I'm nicely lined up with that line, starting with my needle down. Okay, and I'm going to sew as far as the corner. Okay, I've not quite made it, so I'm just going to decrease my stitch length right down to the smallest, tiniest stitch. Take just one stitch and then I can pivot. Just make sure that I'm nice and accurate into the corner there. And again, need to do the same thing and pivot. Okay, I've yet to find the exact stitch length that will take me along the length of a zip box opening, but then I suppose it depends where you start on the zip box opening, doesn't it really? Okay, nearly there. Go back down again. Just take some tiny little nibbles out of there. Actually, I'll leave that long. I was about to cut that off, but I haven't backstitched, have I? So I'll leave that long. Across the short end there. And back to where we started. I'm just going to overlap by a few stitches because I haven't backstitched. Okay, I think there's slightly less bulk, is slightly neater if you don't backstitch. So overlapping is a great option. Okay, lovely. Right, so now we need to steam press these stitches. So I'm just going to get my iron. I've got my tiny iron today. Having a little press, and then I'm on hottest, good job that I didn't catch. And then what I'm going to do is pull the lining pocket away from the main panel lining, and I'm just pressing against that seam, and then the opposite direction, pull it away. There we go. And then on the ends as well. And this end as well. There we go. Okay, once you've steamed those or pressed those, that will sit up nice. That's okay, that's how we want it to be, but this will help your zip box opening sit nice and neat then. So we're going to just do a little snip in the middle there along that central line. And then I'm going to cut as far as the point of the triangle and back the other way. As far as the point of that triangle, and then out along each arm of the triangle to the corner. I'm going as close as I can to the corner without snipping through the stitches in the corner there, as close as I can. Okay, lovely. Right, once I've cut through that central line, we're going to pop that through to the other side, give it a nice little tug, and then work from the right side of the lining main panel, sorry, because then any creases that you press in will be hidden on the wrong side, on the back. Just going to give that a little press along the top there. Nice bit of heat just to help it sit flat. And then just finger roll these seams at the back there. And we're going to press along the side and the bottom there. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so that looks really nice and neat. Now, inevitably, when you're making a zip pocket like this with the opening, you will get some creases in the corners, but by pressing from this side first means that any creases you get will be hidden on the wrong side. I don't know if you can see those, but I do have a crease there, a couple of different places, but that's okay because that's inside our pocket and nobody's going to see that. And if they are looking inside your pocket, then they don't need to be any friend of yours. Okay, friends don't look inside a friend's pockets hunting for creases. Okay, now on the wrong side of this panel we're going to add some basting tape because it's time to add our zip. I've got a pale blue zip for mine. Okay, I keep my double-sided tape in a bag just to keep it sticky, because I find that it's a little bit damp in the studio and it can lose its stick quite easily. I do still need to take the end off, but on the whole it's pretty good, just keeping it in a bag. So I'm pressing it along the length of the zip box, along the top and the bottom. I'm going to do. I'm not going to bother with the sides because that should be enough to hold it in place. Make sure it's pressed down really, really well. Again, this is just to hold your zip in place while you're sewing it into place. So if you prefer to hand baste, then please do. I just absolutely detest hand basting. Well, any kind of hand sewing is really quite torturous to me. I think probably because I'm not very good at it. Much prefer machine. So this double-sided tape is brilliant. Okay. Right, I'm just going to remove the backing paper and then we'll add our zip. Now, it doesn't really matter which way you put it. I like mine to open from left to right. So I'm going to put my zip pull on the right as I'm looking at the wrong side. Just double check that your zip actually works. And I'm using a regular zip, so I've got my metal stopper there and the metal stoppers here. Now I like to know where that metal stopper is, so I'm going to position that right in the end of that zip box, just nestle it into place. And then smooth that down. Before I press too hard, I'm just going to flip it over and double check that that is nicely aligned through the opening, and that looks good to me. Okay, so now you can give it a nice push down. So I'm going to change my stitch length up to a slightly longer stitch length, just so that I can be sure it looks nice and neat. And then I'm going to start sewing down here, and I'm going to sew along to the corner, pivot, up to the corner, pivot, and all the way round like we did before. And again, if you don't think you can quite get to the corner, then decrease your stitch length down so that you can get in there neat. Nice and neat is the name of the game on these zip box openings. So I've started with my needle down so that I can pivot when I get to the corner. Just take your time, and I was sewing an 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from that zip box opening. If you've got a zip foot, then please do swap over to your zip foot. I like to use my walking foot for everything, mostly because I'm lazy. So I'm just carrying on with this foot. So I'm at the corner, so I'm going to pivot and see how close I am. I think that's pretty accurate actually. So I can carry on. Do one more and pivot and have a look. Yeah, that's pretty accurate, so that's okay. Apparently this is the magical stitch length to go around this particular zip box. Just moving my loose thread out of the way. Better move the back one as well, hadn't I? Just to be sure. There we go. Okay, so I'm coming up to the last couple of corners. One more little stitch, there we go. Just going to take it steady over this end because I've got the metal stopper there. And I can pivot, and I want to sew back to where I started. There we go. Okay, now leave your thread tails long, and what we'll do is flip over to the wrong side, and if we just tug on these bobbin threads, you'll find a little loop forms, and that is the loop of the front thread or the top thread. So there's one come through to the back, and there's another one here as well. So by pulling these top threads through to meet the bobbin threads at the back, hang on, where are we now? There we go. So I can separate those off into 2 lots of 2 and then just tie those together, and on the front you won't see that at all. It'll just look like a continuous line of stitching, nice and neat. Snip that off. Okay, let's just have a quick look at the front. Beautiful. Okay, now on the wrong side, I'm just going to trim this extra bit of zip here because mine is slightly too long, and I don't want to be catching that when I'm sewing the sides. Sorry, I apologise, I keep throwing things in my metal trolley and forgetting that actually it's quite noisy, so I'm very sorry. Right, there we go. And then we can fold this down to meet the bottom, and if you fold it really flat then it will be too long. Okay, so fold it so that it meets the bottom edge, and then that will give you a little bit of extra body in the pocket so that the pocket can carry whatever it is that you want to put in the pocket without dragging the lining panel down and misshaping it. Okay, so you should have a nice fold here at the top. Okay, now we're going to sew from the top here to around about here-ish and back stitch at the start and the end, and then we're going to do the same on this side, and then between here just going to do a little line of basting stitches, and this is going to be one of the turning gaps. So we've got 2 turning gaps in this pattern. This is going to be the turning gap to close the turning gap. Okay, so I'm going to start here, back stitch, sew to the corner, pivot, back stitch again. I'm going to increase my stitch length up to my longest basting stitch length, sew across the bottom here, go back down to my regular stitch length and bit of back stitch in here, sew to the corner, pivot, and up to the top and back stitch. So I'll have back stitch in here and here and here and here. I'll have regular stitch length here and basting stitch length in the middle. Okay, now you can sew this how you like. You can do it from this direction and pull that back, or you can sew it from this direction and pull it back like that. I'm going to sew from this direction and pull it back. So I'm going to start with my back stitching. Sew to the corner and pivot, back stitching, increase up to my basting, my longest stitch length, okay, and then decrease back down again, bit of back stitching to the corner, pivot, and back up to the top. Okay, and we'll snip those threads off. I'm going to try and snip my threads as I go so that I don't forget to afterwards. Right, we'll take these pins out. There we go. And so that I don't forget later on, I'm just going to press these basting stitches very, very, very quickly, because that will help them to set. So later on then, when we want to close that turning gap, they will naturally, the seam allowances should naturally fall closed along that line of stitch holes there. Okay, beautiful. Right, okay, so now we can pop this to one side just for the moment, and we're going to get started on this slip pocket. I'll just pop that there so I don't lose it. So you should have another rectangle piece, okay, and this one we're going to fold in half lengthwise. Okay, now if you've used directional fabric and have cut it out so that this really won't work, then you can fold it the other way. It will just be a little bit tight on your zip pocket opening there, so you might want to just trim it slightly. Okay, so I'm just adding a few pins. I'm trying to use my black pins so that you can see where I'm sewing. Now we are going to leave a turning gap in the bottom here, so we're going to sew from the top corner back stitch to the corner pivot and sew to here and back stitch, and then change up to basting stitch length, go across the turning gap, do a little bit of back stitch in here with our regular stitch length, and then carry on to the end. Okay, I'm going to start my needle down again. I'm at my regular stitch length, bit of back stitching at the start there, and at the corner we'll pivot, bit of back stitch in there just to mark the start of the turning gap, and then across the turning gap a little bit of back stitching at the regular stitch length to the corner and pivot, and then back stitch at the end. Okay, and I'll trim my threads again. We've also only just vacuumed up here, so I'm trying really hard to get my threads in the bin, but so far it's not working too well. It's the thought that counts though. Okay, now I'm going to trim my corners, and to do that all I do is snip straight across and then again a little bit further into the seam allowance just to take the excess bulk from there, and again on that side. And at the tops here, I'm just taking the bulk of the seam allowance out, and that will just mean that those corners sit nice and neat when we turn those out. So we just need to press this little bit of a turning gap here. Okay, so I'm just going to press those stitches, help those leave a nice little imprint of the seam allowance. And then we're going to take those stitches out so we can turn the pocket through, and as you pull these stitches out you'll be able to see that it's leaving a nice line of stitch holes behind. So that you can follow those holes later on. Okay, right, so we're going to turn this through to the right side, just having a little look, see what I've got by way of corner poking out tool. Oh, I've got a nice spoon. Here we go, perfect. The spoon is one of my most used tools at the moment, and never really for stirring a drink or eating cake. Okay, so I'm just going to poke those corners out nice and gently. You don't want to go through the stitches, but you do want a nice proud corner. Okay, and then choose which side looks nicest for your pocket. Do you know, I think I prefer this side. So I'm going to finger roll the short end and give that a little press. And the same on the other end, and a little press. And then I can press all along this top edge, make sure that that's sitting nice and neat, and down. Now you can see that our turning gap needs folding under, and all I'm going to do is just follow that little line of stitch holes that's been left behind, and it should naturally want to fold under. So just give it a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of extra manipulation if you need to, and then we'll give that a press to help it stay in place. Okay, beautiful, lovely. I do like a lot of pockets, if I'm honest. I'm a pocket kind of girl. Right, so now on this folded edge, we're going to top stitch along the top there. So I'm going to go slightly longer than my regular stitch length and whiz along the top. I haven't back stitched. I'm going to tie the threads together at the end. You can back stitch if you prefer. I just find that whenever I'm doing neat top stitching and I back stitch, I always seem to go slightly wonky. Okay, so we're just going to tie these off so they're nice and neat. Just a couple of knots is fine. And again, a couple of knots, perfect. Okay, now I have to try and remember which side I decided was the side that I wanted. I have no idea, so it was really helpful deciding that, wasn't it? Okay, so retrieve your lining main panel with the zip pocket attached, and the first thing we're going to do is just pull this zip pocket up out of the way and add a pin. I'm adding a black pin so I can see what's what. And then we're going to place this slip pocket on top of this panel, lining up our centres. Let me check the pattern for the measurement of where to place it. Okay. Again, lining up the centres. So I'm just going to fold this pocket in half to get my centre measurement. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to pin in these 4 corners just to hold it in place while we stitch it. Now this is a nice long pocket, so you can divide this how you think you're going to use it most. Okay, so let's have a little look. What I like to do, let's move my pressing mat out of the way. If I want to carry a pen, then I find 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimeters is a perfect measurement for that. So I think I'll start with that because that's a good starting point to begin with. I've got a white chalk marker, so we'll see how well that's seen on this when I'm trying to sew straight. Not ideal. Mark it with a couple of pins as well. And then I think maybe, what have I got left? I might go for maybe 5 inches. I think 5 inches is around 12.5, maybe 12.75 centimeters. So I'll mark that again. I just want to make sure that my turning gap is nice and neatly together here. Okay, so I'm going to mark that with some pins. There. Right, now to secure this into place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at this top corner here, and I'm going to backstitch, and I'm going to backstitch onto the lining main panel. So I'm going to start here, backstitch, and sew all the way down to the corner and pivot, and then along as far as this first marking. Then I'm going to pivot and sew up to the top, backstitch, pivot again, and sew back down to the bottom, along the bottom to the next marking, pivot, up to the top and backstitch, down again to the corner and back up. So we'll have backstitching at each corner edge and at the start of each dividing line, and then the rest of it will all be stitched into place nice and neatly and securely. Just add an extra pin there to keep my turning gaps together. So I'm going to sew with my slightly longer stitch length that I'm using, just to make it nice and pretty. Okay, so back stitch in there, sew into the corner, stopping with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot. And I'm sewing as far as the first dividing line. I'm just reducing my stitch length down so I can hit that accurately, because I have gone to the trouble of marking it, so I probably should. Back up to my top stitching stitch length, and I'm going to sew up this line, moving my pins as I go. A little bit of back stitching here, and then lift my presser foot and pivot all the way around so I can sew back down this line. Just putting my turning gap to meet each other. Okay, and then pivot and back along the bottom, and we're closing that turning gap as we do this, and pivot, so up to my next dividing line, and so up to the top. Stop with my needle down and pivot. There we go, and back down. And then nearly to the end, just along this bottom bit to the corner, pivot and up to the top. And some back stitching at the top there, just to finish us off. Okay, lovely. You can add whatever pockets you want to this bag because it's your bag. If you want to have a little look at my Patreon channel, patreon.com/Baganeer, then there are other options for pockets that you can add to their little video tutorials of what you can add to there. So double check that your pockets work. Yep, they work, great. So that's one of our lining main panels done. I'm going to open that zip up all the way so that I know that that's definitely open. My slip pockets are done. It's time to work on the next lining main panel and the other pocket, the full width pocket. Okay, moving on, we are going to work with the full width pocket E for our final slip pocket. You should have two of these exactly the same. It does say in the pattern to cut one out of exterior or lining and the second one out of lining. So I've cut both of mine out of lining because my exterior fabric is vinyl. I don't want vinyl inside my bag really. So I'm using lining, and all we're going to do is pop these together, right sides together, matching up all edges, right sides together, and then we're going to sew along the top edge only, and we're using our regular seam allowance for this. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. I'm using my regular construction stitch length for this. A little bit of back stitching, and then I'm sewing along to the other end. And back stitching at that end as well. Okay, and trim these threads. It's a super simple, easy way to add a pocket, this is. I like super simple and easy in the same sentence. Now all we're going to do is flip it the other way round and give it a nice press. But I think that to get a really, really, really nice neat finish, what we need to do, just my pressing mat back again, is flip it open halfway. Okay, and then I'm just going to press it. I've got my spray bottle. I'm just going to add a little bit of water because I noticed that my tiny iron's not really giving out much steam at the moment. So we just flip that open. I'm going to press against that seam, or almost press the seam allowances to one side. Okay, all the way along that seam, and then I can flip that over to the other side, and you should find that this seam is nice and neat there, and we can press along that top seam, get a nice crisp finish on that. If you are using a different fabric, what you could do is just cut one of these slightly longer and one of them slightly shorter, and have a contrast band across the top, or a bit of piping. Love a bit of piping, a bit of trim or something. I'm going for the classic just lining fabric on this one, but really the world is your oyster. Okay, so as we did before, decide what you want to be your outside and what you want to be your inside. I think my fabric is actually exactly the same on both sides, so decide which is your neater edge along the top, and then we're going to top stitch. So my slightly longer top stitch in stitch length, top stitch along the top edge, and when I'm top stitching I'm sewing at 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from that edge. Okay, lovely, nice and neat. And then we're going to pop this on our second lining main panel, so the one that doesn't have anything attached just yet. And in theory you shouldn't need to mark the centres for these, they should all just line up. Move everything out of the way so I've got enough space, there we go. So in theory if your bottom edge matches, then your side edges should match and everything should line up nice and neat. I'm going to add a couple of pins in just to hold these in place. And of course we did need to mark our centres because we're going to divide it in half, or you could divide it however you wish really. If you want to divide it a different way, that's fine as well. So I'll just fold this all in half to find my centre. There's my centre there. While I'm here, let's do the top as well, and then we can pretend that we did it right at the start where the pattern tells us to. I say that as though it's not me who's written the pattern. Okay, so just matching up those two centre marks, that will then give me a nice straight line for my centre dividing line of stitching. I can see that quite well, so I don't need to pin that. Now what I'm going to do, this only needs to be basted around the outside, but I do need my normal top stitch and stitch length for that middle bit. So I'm just going to start here and back stitch, baste to the corner, pivot, baste to here, and then change my stitch length to my top stitch and stitch length. Go up to the top, back stitch, down again, and then baste around the outside as well. Okay. Right, so I'll start on my longest stitch length, my basting stitch length, and remember to baste within the seam allowance. So the seam allowance on this one is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. So I'm basting at 1/4 of an inch or 6 mil from the edge. Sometimes slightly less because I forget and I go wibbling off to the edge, but it doesn't matter because it's going to be hidden within my seams. Nobody's going to know. Except for you, because I've told you now, but you're not going to tell anybody, so that's okay. Right, so swapped up to my top stitch and stitch length. I'm going to sew up this centre line and back stitch at the top, bit of extra stability, and then back down that line of stitching. And then I'm going back up to my basting stitch length, and I'll sew along the bottom and the sides then. And this side. Back up to the top, the edge of that pocket, and do a little bit of back stitching. This is just purely to hold it in place because we are going to sew this pocket into the seams. But it's nice to know that your pocket's not going anywhere while you're doing your construction. Okay, lovely. Now I do have a brand label with me, so I'm just going to pop that in. So if you use labels as well, you can pop yours in. Mine comes from Naked Labels, who are a UK based company. I don't get a discount or paid for mentioning them. I just use them and like them. They come in lots of different sizes, come in white, come in black. You can have silver writing, gold writing, black writing. I think you can have white writing as well. But that's who I use for my labels if you are looking for a label maker. Okay, so I've just added that into my side seam, basted it into place, so that will be there later on after I've constructed my bag. Okay, now let's double check that I haven't forgotten anything. I don't believe I have, no. So now what we need is our base. Okay, so that's our rectangle piece. I'm going to mark the centres of this on all 4 edges. Okay, because that will come in handy later on. So just the centre there and there. I'm going to do the other side as well, just in case I need that. And then fold it in half the other way as well. Mark the centre there and there. And then on the final side as well. So all 4 edges will have that centre mark on. Okay, lovely. Now, I'm going to start working on this panel that's got the full width pocket on. You can start on whichever side you prefer. Now lining up that centre mark and pin that into place so that I know that that is nice and secure. And then the ends. Now we need to do a little bit of measuring here because we're going to leave 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre unsewn at either end. So I like to just mark that so that I remember where to start and stop sewing. 1, 2, 3. Wondering if I've got the right measurement. Yes, I did. Okay. Always doubt yourself, don't you, part way through? You think, hang on, did I? Okay, so we are going to, where are we leaving our turning gap? In the other side. Okay, so I'm going to sew along the bottom here between the 2 marks, I'm going to use my regular construction stitch length, and I'm using my regular seam allowance, I believe. Let's just double check. Yes, I am. Okay, so I'm starting slightly in from the edge where that mark is, back stitching, going all the way along the bottom to the next mark. That's that second mark, and back stitching, and we'll finish there. Okay, so you've got the two ends unsewn, and that's going to come in handy when we do our box corners later on. Okay, there we go, and we've back stitched at the start and the end. We're going to make a tiny little snip into the seam allowance, just about just about where it starts and stops on stitching. Okay, so get as close as you can to that mark, and we're going to just snip into the seam allowance, not all the way, just as far as the seam allowance. Okay, so we're not in danger of compromising our fabric there. Right, so now we need our second lining main panel. We've got our centre marked on here, which is handy, and we're going to add the base to our second panel. So just open your panel out. So I've got my lining main panel with full width pocket and my base attached, and all I'm going to do is flip that over. Try and ignore the fact that you've got this lining main panel attached. Line up that centre mark and add a pin, and then make sure this is nice and straight along the bottom edge, and we will mark the starting and stopping point 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre if you're working in metric. Add a pin. Now we do need to leave a turning gap in the bottom of here, so let's have a look. How big can we make that? I think ideally we need to leave it at least 7 inches. Can we leave 8 inches? Let's see. We could leave 8 inches, so it's up to you, your choice. I would leave at least 7 inches, I think. I'm going to try and leave 8 inches, and we'll find out later in the video whether that works. So I'm just adding double pins in here to remind me to start and stop sewing. Okay, so we'll start from this first mark and back stitch. We're using our regular stitch length. Sew to this double pins and back stitch, change up to my basting stitch length and sew across the turning gap, go back down to my regular stitch length, back stitch, and to the second mark and back stitch again. Okay, I'll talk you through while I'm doing it as well. I'm using our regular seam allowance on this, so I'm starting with my needle down, a few stitches and some back stitches, sewing to this double pins and back stitch, and then basting stitch across to the other set of double pins, and then back down to construction stitch length, back stitch and to the last mark and back stitch. Okay, lovely. We will need to just steam press these stitches before we take them out. I'm going to take my pins out to start with. Oh dear, I don't, well, I suppose it works. Okay. Right, hang on. Oh, I need to cut my little snip in first before we do any pressing. So I'll cut my little snip into the seam allowance on either side. There we go. And then what we're going to do is press open the seam allowances, and that will then press open our turning gap as well. So we'll just turn that over so we can see what we're doing. Give that a little press. And this will mean that when you turn your bag through and push your lining back inside, it will sit nice and neat inside the bag. And the same for this one. This one's not quite so easy because you've got the full width slip pocket there. You've got the extra bulk in that seam allowance, but it's still mostly doable. So just give it a go as best you can along that seam line. Just help it sit nice and neat. Okay, move that out of the way. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to fold this panel so that we're matching the lining main panels together, so we can match these side edges. We've got our bottom seams done, just matching these side edges now. So I'll add a pin in the top and in the bottom, make sure they're nicely lined up, and then in a couple of places along here. And then flip it over and again match the top and the bottom. And then the edges, there we go, all nicely matched. Add another couple in just for fun, just hold everything in place. I don't think that's quite matching on the other side actually, so I'll flip it over, make sure it's nicely lined up on both sides. There we go, that's better. Now I've still got a pin in there for my label, so I'll take that out now before I forget that it's there and I catch myself later on, but I will use that pin. There we go. Okay, so we're going to sew these together from the top to the bottom, and we're going to start sewing at 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimetre for our normal seam allowance. Okay, and we're going to sew for about 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres. Then we're going to taper to a 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetre seam allowance, and then for the last inch we're going to taper back down to our regular seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to draw that on this one so that you can see what I mean. So we've got a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance there, and that will go to there, so that's 1 inch there. Okay, and then from there we need to taper out to a 1/2 inch seam allowance, except for the final inch, which is there, and that is a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, these are 1 centimetre and 1.2 centimetre. So you can see there's a slight difference in these seam allowances. So all we're going to do is just connect those up to a nice smooth line, so that as we're sewing we have a smaller seam allowance at the top and the bottom so that it matches everything else, but we take a little bit of extra bulk out of here in the middle. I'm going to do that on both sides. Okay, so if you want to draw it on so you can see where you're going, you can. Okay, we are going to use our regular construction length stitch length. We're going to back stitch at the start and the end of our seams. I'm starting with my needle down as I do so that I can reposition my hands if I need to. And we're just sewing all the way to the top using that tapered seam allowance. Okay, and I've back stitched at the end there as well. I'm just thinking bag making, back stitching for every seam is a sensible option. Okay, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm not going to draw the seam allowance on this one. And tapered to a 1/2 inch there. And then I'm looking at tapering back to the 3/8 of an inch. That's 1.2 centimetre down to a 1 centimetre seam allowance there. Okay, lovely. Very nice and neat. Okay, pins, let's take those out. And grab my pressing mat back again. I'm going to try to press open my side seams as far as I can. So all I do for that is just fold them back and give them a little press. If you can do this, then that's great. It will result in a really nice, neat finish. If you can't, don't panic too much, okay? You can always stitch them open or finger press them open or just hold them open later on. It's the very, very top couple of inches and bottom couple of inches that matters. So it gets a little bit tricky along the way to press these open. Just do your best if you can. There we go. Okay, it's not perfect, but it will do. I'm folding this edge back, giving it a little press. This is easier with a big iron and a proper ironing board, I must admit. But various constraints have me working with this tiny iron, which does keep things fun because you never know if you're going to scald your fingers or not. Adds an element of surprise to proceedings. Okay, there we go. Right, so now we need to box our corners. Okay, so this is not as complicated as it sounds. We've got our centre mark on the bottom of our base and our seam at the side is also in the centre. So all we're going to do is match up that centre mark first and add a pin. And then just smooth this down so that the edges match. You can work on both sides together or one side and then the other side, it doesn't matter. Okay, and then at the end here, just fold in the edge of the lining main panel. Can you see I've got it nicely folded there? Just so it sits nice and flat on that corner. And the same on this side. A little bit of a tuck there to get that to sit nice and flat. Okay, and then we're just going to sew across this boxed corner using our regular seam allowance. And back stitching at the start and the end as usual. There we go, lovely. Double check your corner before we go any further. Yep, that looks great to me. No puckers or creases or anything, that's fine. And then we're going to do the same on this side as well. So first of all, match up the centre with your side seam allowance, and then smooth out. All the way to these corners. And all we need to know is that whatever's going under our presser foot is flat, and then you'll end up with nice smooth box corners. Okay, so just smooth this down how you need to, fold it how you need to get that area nice and smooth and flat. Okay, and same seam allowance as before, back stitch at the start and the end. And of course, by doing this, you're also sewing your seam allowances open, so you'll end up with a nice neat finish inside the lining. Okay, so let's pull these pins out and double check our corner or corners. Yep, they look good. You can turn it right sides out and just have a little check. Yep, lovely, nice and neat, and nice and neat. Great. Right, you can pop your lining to one side for the moment then, because the lining is done. What I might do though is just open this turning gap before we go any further, so that I don't forget to open it later, because I might come unstuck there, mightn't I? So just unpick those stitches along that turning gap in the base. Okay, so that leaves us our nice seam line to follow. And while we're here, maybe I should probably also unpick the stitches from the turning gap in the pocket, just so that we know we're all ready, nothing else to do on the lining now at all. And did I remove all of the pins from inside? That's a good question. Yes, I can't feel any, and I haven't been stabbed by anything. Right, so my lining is done and ready to go, so I can pop that to one side for the minute and work on the exterior of the bag, and then we'll pop them both together once we're done. Right, let's go on to the flap. So we'll need our lining flap piece to start with. Of course, we marked our centres, didn't we? So we'll do that now. I say we, you probably did. So I'm sorry for holding you up. Talk amongst yourselves. There we go. I'll mark it on the wrong side on that one as well. Okay, so now we need to add our snap. So we need the male half. So each time you buy a snap, you get 2 washers, a male half and a female half. I could have separated this before I started filming, which would have been much easier, wouldn't it? But apparently not. There we go. Okay, so we need the male half, so that's the one that's got the sticky out bit, and the female half and a washer can go to one side for the moment. They're going into our exterior main panel. So using the washer, we'll use the measurements on the pattern, and that's the measurement to the center of the washer. So add a little dot in there at the right measurement, and then what did I do with the washer? I'm sure I just had it. I hope I'm not going to have to go back and watch the film to find out what I've done with it. Oh, I think it was attached to my sleeve. There we go. That was like a magic trick then, wasn't it? Okay, so we'll center the washer over that dot. Add 2 little prong slit marks there. I impressed myself then I did with that magic trick. And we'll snip into those. No, that's not going to work, is it? I need some smaller scissors than that. just snip into those 2 prong marks and check that they work. This is not the way we're adding our snap. I'm going to add it onto the right side. Just wanted to check that it worked. And then a little bit of fray check. And then from the right side, push my prongs through. There we go. Oh, I've picked up the washer again somewhere. Where's it gone this time? Is it attached to my dress, I think? I don't know how I've managed it. I've done it twice now. Right. If anybody could go back in time to when I first lost it and warn me not to lose it a second time, that would be really helpful. Oh, there it is. Again, attached to my dress. Okay, let's try and remember that for the next time, for the other half. Right, so I want a square of foam. I'll cut 2 because we need a second one for later. Okay, be careful with this washer now, Samantha. Don't lose it. Just make some little snips in there and pop that on, and then the washer can't get lost anymore once it's on, can it? And I'm going to bend my prongs inwards so that that snap is pulling against itself. I know a lot of people say it doesn't matter, but I have seen snaps that have come out where they've been bent outwards, so I do like to bend them inwards. That's fine. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of tape to the back so that those prongs are not going anywhere. There we go. Okay, right, lovely. Our snap is added. Now we need our exterior flap. So that's the one that's got the foam but no Decaville added. I'm going to line up all of the edges. I'm going to line up my top edge first so that I know that it's definitely in the right place. I'm not sewing the top edge just yet, but I am going to line it up, and then I know that everything else is all in place. Okay, and then I can pull this edge down to match. I find that once I've added a snap to just regular cotton, it does almost pull in a little bit as though it's shrinking. So if you clip the top first and then can you see it slightly seems slightly too short there, but if you clip the top and then pull it down into place along the bottom edge, it does sit nice and neat. And of course, once you've sewn it into place, it stays nice and taut. Just add another couple of clips at the top there to keep that nice and together. Okay, great. Now I'm going to sew around the outside of the flap. We're going to leave the top straight edge open, so we're going to back stitch at the start and the end. We're going to use our regular stitch length and regular seam allowance. I'm just going to move some of my extra bits and pieces here. Okay. Back stitch and then carry on round. Take your time on these curves. It's a nice wide curve, so you want a nice neat finish to it. All the way round. Might have gone too far there. There we go. Okay. And then up to the top and back stitch at the top as well. Lovely. Okay. Now we'll need our pinking shears. We're just going to trim around this curve with our pinking shears. If you don't have any pinking shears, you can use regular scissors and just notch the curve so that when you turn it right sides out, it sits nice and neat. I find pinking shears are a little bit easier though. I suppose they're the time-saving option, aren't they? They have the same effect. Although I've never actually managed to find a pair of pinking shears that's all that strong for bag making. They're a bit hit and miss, aren't they? Okay. And what we're also going to do is just reduce a little bit of the bulk at the top here. So cut into that little angle there and snip away a little triangle. I've got my scissors that are too big again. So I'm snipping directly into the apex of that angle. And then a little bit either side. And if you want to, you can also reduce a little bit of the bulk at the top corners as well. Although I think I might turn mine right sides out and see how it looks first before I snip anything else away. Okay. Lovely. Okay. So now we can turn this right sides out and see how we've done on our curves. Probably should have turned it out and checked before I snipped, but adds a little bit of extra fun to proceedings, doesn't it? Okay, so I'm just smoothing that out. Right, looks pretty good from the wrong side. Let's see how it looks from the right side. Excellent. Okay, looks pretty good from the right side as well. Now if you're using cotton, then I would encourage you to give it a good press at this point. Make sure that it's sitting nice and flat, but because I'm using this vinyl does not like being pressed at all. I'm just going to clip all the way around to hold those seams out nice and proud so that I can then go round and top stitch. All the way round back to the top, and I just want to double check before I start top stitching that my lining is pulled nice and taut so the top edges match. And I'm gonna, I might actually clip that, pin that, sorry. I'm not sewing this bit, so I'll pin in the seam allowance just to hold that in place. Just so I know that that is nice and secure and level before we start top stitching. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to leave that to sit and think about its actions for a minute, and then when I come back I'm going to top stitch around the perimeter of this curve of the flap. Right, hopefully my flap has thought about its actions and will behave. So I'm going to increase my stitch length up to my top stitching stitch length, and then I'm going to start at the top here and sew down and around the curve to the other side Just be aware when you come to this section you've got the magnetic snap there, so you just need to stabilize that as you sew around that section. You can back stitch at the start if you want, but this is going into another seam, so you don't need to. So I'm going to leave my threads long. Again, I'm top stitching at 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil from the edge. Take time around these curves. Keep it nice and easy, no need to rush. Okay, lovely. That went well, so I'm pleased with that. I'm just going to baste across the top edge now, just to keep those edges nice and together while we're sewing this into place. I'm going to change those pins out for some clips so that I can remove them a little bit easier. Okay, and I'm just going to whiz across the top here from the other direction, I think, with my long basting stitch, just to hold all those layers together. Brilliant. Right, I'm pleased with that. That looks good. That's nice and neat. Okay, now we need our exterior main panel, the one that you want to go on the back. So if you've got 2 panels and you were hoping for one to go on the front and one to go on the back, then retrieve your one that you'd like to go on the back. Centres, of course, we should have marked our centres. Might be a bit trickier now that I've applied the stabilizer. This is why you should do it at the start, really. I see, every time I say it as though I'm telling myself off and I still don't listen. Maybe next year's New Year's resolution. It might have been this year's New Year's resolution, now come to think about it. Right, okay, so this is my exterior main panel that I want to go on the back. And I'm going to pop my flap right sides together. So I've got my vinyl right side down, matching up that centre mark, and add a little clip. And then just clip along the top here. Matching up those edges, those raw edges. Lovely. Okay, now we're going to baste these 2 together within the seam allowance. So I'm on my long basting stitch length, and I am going to back stitch at the start and the end, just so that I know that that is not moving when I come to my final construction. I'm going all the way along the top within the seam allowance, basting these into place. Okay, great. Right, this can be popped to one side for the moment. We'll carry on with that in a little bit, but we'll get our other main panel. So this is the one that you want to be the front, our other exterior main panel, and I'll mark the centres on this as well. Hang on, I've marked the exterior. There we go. A bit better. And we'll do the bottom as well. We're going to add our magnetic snap into here, the other half of it. Okay. So we'll use the washer again. And I'm just going to, now this pattern is currently going through testing at the moment as I'm filming this, so I'm not going to give you the measurement for this just in case it needs to change slightly. Okay, but I could just double check while we're here very briefly. This is not the way to double check, by the way, so don't think that this is the right way to do it. Yeah, that looks not too far off. Okay, right, washer. Now I do seem to have learned from the last time, and I put my washer up there, so I am at least trying to not lose my washers. Put it back up there again. Okay. Or I could snap it onto my snap, couldn't I? Now we just need to make these little slit holes for the prongs. If you're using a seam ripper, just be very, very careful with it. My vinyl doesn't snip tiny holes too easily, but it's fine with a seam ripper. I'm just putting that in. Making a nice little hole in each. I'm being very, very careful there not to go too far. I'm just going to test it with the snap before I consider that done. No. No, not through yet. Difficult, isn't it, with so many layers? What you can do if you're a bit cautious is just add a pin at the top of each slit mark. Make sure you don't go too far. Of course, I haven't done that because I like the extra peril. Right, that is through, so that's great. If you're using a fabric that frays, then I would recommend using a dab of fray check on that. Just push my prong all the way through. When I'm using lots of layers like this, I like to just use the end of my spoon to make sure it's pushed right down. And my washer, and bend my prongs in. I don't actually need that extra scrap of foam, of course, because I've got my Decaville and my foam here, so I didn't need that after all. And then a little bit of duct tape on the back just to secure it. There we go. I think that's very, very secure without the extra bit of foam, because I've got my vinyl, Decaville and foam and my washer, so we should be okay. All right, lovely. Okay, so I've added that, and now I need to add my base. So you can do it on whichever side you prefer. You can do it on the piece that's got the flap or the piece that's got the snap. Either way is okay. Do need to mark my centres of my base again though. Remember, we're doing it on all 4 edges for the base, so that we can line up for our boxed corners. Okay, lovely. So we'll just match that together, matching the centres. And then clip all the way along. Now remember, we are again leaving our gap at each end. So we can mark that, make sure that we leave that little gap unsewn. And you know, I think that on my lining I actually snipped into the wrong bit, so I might just add a little note into the pattern. I'll add it now so I don't forget. Okay, there we go. Right. So I will sew this side first, and then we'll sew the other side. I need to change back up to my construction length, stitch length, and I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. I'm going to start sewing where that mark is, and I'm going to stop sewing where the other mark is. Use my regular seam allowance as well, 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. There we go, at the other end. Okay, lovely. All good. Now when I do my snipping, I think I should probably do it on the correct piece, which is actually on the main panel piece, which will just make it slightly easier to do those box corners. I mean, it's manageable as you saw, but just for the sake of doing things right. Okay, so we've got our other main panel with the flap attached, and then we're going to flip this over, open it out and match the center there. And then we need to mark our stitching points with the pencil that I've put down. There we go. I do wonder sometimes whether I actually need like a little bit of a tool belt so that I don't put things down and misplace them, because I do seem to do that a lot. I wonder if that's a common thing or if it's a me thing. Okay, so all along there. Right, so same stitch length, same stitch, seam allowance, and I'm back stitching at the start by that mark, and then at the end that second mark. There we go, lovely. So we're just repeating the exact same process we did for the lining, except I'm making my snips into the correct layer, which is the exterior main panel layer, not the base layer. Okay, now if you can press your seams open, then I would recommend that you do as far as you can. Okay, if you can't, don't panic about it. So we'll pop the flap back in there. Might just clip that together so it stays out of the way if I can. There we go. Right, then we're matching the top and the bottom of these side seams the same as we did before. If you're using a vinyl like me, then this will be a bit stiff, I guess, to do. If you're using cotton, then it will be a lot easier. Okay, so we've just got our side seam there, and we're going to sew this using the regular seam allowance from top to bottom. So don't panic about tapering or anything. We're going to back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, and we'll do the same the other side. So starting off by matching these edges on this side edge. From the top to the bottom. Just want to make sure that my flap is out of the way in the back there. And back stitch at the start, we're sewing all the way along this side. To the bottom. Okay, lovely. There we go. Okay, now if you're able to press your side seams open, then I would recommend it. If not, what you can do is just open these side seams at the top and at the bottom and give them a little clip. And we'll just baste those into place if possible. Just hold those seam allowances open. This is a newish vinyl to me. It's a little bit stiffer than ones that I usually use. I'm hoping that I'll still be able to do this. Unclip my flap inside. So I just really want to be able to baste those open. How can I do that? Possibly from this angle. There we go. So just within the seam allowance, I'm just stitching over those two seam allowances to keep them open. And that one, and then I'll do the same at the top as well, just to hold them open. You can do this on any bag really, it just helps reduce the bulk when you're sewing those final seams, because your seam allowances are kept open then. I can get it under my foot. It's not ideal because I've got a flat bed. I can get it under my foot. If you've got a free arm, then I would recommend using the free arm instead. Be a little bit easier. Or I could have turned my bag the other way round. That would have helped, wouldn't it? There we go. That is actually much better now. There we go. Lovely. Okay, so that's ready for our boxed corner to be constructed. So all we need to do now is match up that centre mark on the base with that side seam there, and just flatten these out as best you can. Now that we've put the snip in the right place, that should be a lot easier, because it should naturally fold along that corner crease there. If not, just pop your hand inside and just smooth it out slightly. As I said before, what you want under your presser foot is for this fabric just to be nice and smooth all the way along. Okay, so we'll do this one. I've got my regular construction length, stitch length there. I'm using my regular seam allowance of 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. Going across this box corner. As we come to that side seam, trying to flatten it so that you can see it on the camera. I don't think you can. As we come to that side seam, your seam allowances should be open. Just hold them open a little bit higher up if you can, just to make sure that it's nice and neat at the bottom there. I'm going all the way across from one side to the other and back stitch at the end. Okay, lovely. Now if you find that when you have a little peek inside, which would be a good idea to do, just to double check that your corner is nice and neat. If you find that you can see your stitches showing along that boxed corner line, let me just check that I haven't got anything wibbly or wonky. Nope, that's fine, that's fine. Okay, then what I like to do is just add another line of stitching in the seam allowance all the way along, just to reduce the strain on that seam a little bit. There we go, just to reduce that strain a little bit. Now we're going to do exactly the same to the other side. You know the drill by now. We match the centre and the edges and smooth it out nicely. Now I'm going to pop my hand in. Just smooth it out. There's a little crease there, so I'm just smoothing that out again so that it sits nice and flat for when it goes under the presser foot. Okay. Make sure my flap is out of the way nicely. And then we'll pop that under the presser foot, needle down, same stitch length, same seam allowance. Going all the way along. And before I check it, I am going to do that second line of stitching just to reduce the strain on that seam. Okay, lovely. Double check my corners, check there's no funny puckers or anything. No, brilliant. Okay, so once you've sewn those corners, this could be placed to one side next to the lining, that's fine. Done our exterior, we've done our lining, we just need to do our strap and pop them all together. Okay, so pop this to one side and we'll get started on our strap. Okay, so the strap is constructed with 2 strap tabs and then the strap piece, and I've already gone ahead and done my pressing because you've seen my tiny iron and I thought it'd be much easier to press it off screen. Okay, so first thing you're going to do is fold your strap in half and give it a good press, so right sides together. Open it out and fold each long edge into the centre and give them a press. Okay, easy peasy. Fold it in half again and give it another press. Okay, but we're not going to stitch it like that just yet. What we're going to do is where we've got our folds, we are going to flip that and match those folded edges together so that these raw edges are sort of poking up like that and our nice folded edges are together like that there. Okay, and then we're going to sew that using 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance, using our regular stitch length. We're going to back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, And then we're going to do the same on the other end as well. So open it out and match those folded edges together. And back stitch at the start and the end. We're sewing across that short end. Okay, and then what we're going to do is just trim these corners. On both ends. I think most of those corners went on the floor then. Oops. And then we're just going to fold that through to the right side. Let me get my spoon and push that sewn corner out. Okay, lovely. So I'll do that again. So that's our sewn corner. Just going to put my thumb in there and my finger on the opposite corner and fold it right sides out. Use my spoon to make sure that seam is nice and proud. Just give it a nice little finger roll, and in theory your strap should fall back into place along those original creases. Now we're going to sew around all 4 edges. I'm going to start on this open edge, so I'm going to start somewhere near the top here and sew down the open edge to this bottom corner. Leave my needle down, lift my press foot and pivot along the short end, up this folded long edge, short edge, and back to where we started. Okay, so all 4 edges will be top stitched, and we'll close the open edge first. Now I'm using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, or 3mm, and I've gone up to my top stitch in stitch length. I haven't back stitched at the start. I'm going to tie my threads off afterwards, or overlap. I might overlap. Okay, I'm coming up to the corner. I'm just going to pivot. Not quite far enough, so I'll go down and then pivot. There we go. Along the short end to the corner. And pivot. Back up to the second short end, across the short end, and pivot, and back down to where we started. And I'm just going to overlap by a few stitches just to secure that stitching. Okay, and I'm going to snip off from the right side. There we go. Okay, lovely. So our strap is done, ready to apply. We need our strap tabs now. Let me double check that I haven't forgotten anything. No, great. Okay, so all I've done with my strap tabs, again, I've pre-pressed these. I've drawn a line along the center on the wrong side, and then folded each long edge into the center and pressed. Then we're going to top stitch on the right side, so make sure I'm on my top stitch in stitch length, again at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge, all the way along these edges. So they should be 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimeters by 4 inches or 10 centimeters at this point. Once you get to that edge, you can flip it around and just whiz that through the sewing machine as well. So just top stitching. This is mostly decorative, just to hold them in place, because they will be sewn into the top seam of the bag, of course. Right, there we go. Now this one where I've started a stitch too far in, so I'll just tie that off. There we go. And then we need our rectangle rings. I'm going to pop these on to the centre, match up those raw edges there, and pop that one on. And then what I like to do is just top stitch as close as I can to the ring, which minimises any swivelling or movements when you're using the bag. So as much as I am very lazy with my presser feet, I am actually going to swap my presser foot over for my adjustable zip foot, so I can get nice and close for that top stitching. If you prefer to rivet instead of stitching, then you can, that's completely fine. The one thing this bag would definitely look lovely with is some rivets. They're not in the pattern because it's intended as a beginner or confident beginner, adventurous beginner. Okay, but actually a few rivets are always lovely, aren't they? So I'm just going to top stitch as close as I can underneath the rectangle ring. And back again. I'm going to leave those thread tails long and I'm going to tie those together. You can back stitch if you prefer. So I'm pulling on my ring as I'm sewing across, just to make sure that the ring is out of the way of the needle coming down. There we go. Okay, lovely. So let's see if I can get those threads to the back and tie them together. Feel free to fast forward me on this bit, because I understand this is not the most entertaining part of sewing a bag. No, let's use a needle. I know I've got a needle in here because the thread keeps getting caught up with my pins and pulling pins out, which is very helpful. Is there two? No, just an extra bit of thread. Okay. So I'm going to use this needle to thread that front thread through to the back, and then I can tie it off. This is where we all think, oh, I hate threading needles. There we go. Okay, so I'll thread that through to the back. So that's 4 threads on the back there. I can tie those off nice and neat. I'm very excited to see this bag finished. I think it's going to look great. Very seasidey and holiday-y, I think, which is nice. Okay, so let's see if I can pull my threads through on the other one. No, let's just use the needle. Thread them through to the back. Save myself the hassle. I've just threaded that onto the needle. I'm just going to push that through to the back and pull the thread off the needle so it leaves it behind ready to tie together. Okay. There we go. Okay. So we can tie these threads together as well. 2 and 2. And then we can attach our strap to the rings. Okay, lovely. So what I'm going to do is just thread this through from the wrong side, and because I'm using cotton, that should be enough. That is the right side, isn't it? Yeah. My rings have got a right side and a wrong side, so I'm just making sure that my turnover goes through from the right side to the wrong side. Better match these, hadn't I? There we go. Now you can sew these how you like, or you can rivet them into place. I'm going to sew them. I'm going to change my presser foot back over to my walking foot so that it can handle the slightly bulkier bits of fabric. You can change this for a crossbody strap very, very, very easily because there's 2 rectangle rings. And again, the tutorial for different straps is, well, there's a few tutorials for different straps. That's on my Patreon channel, patreon.com/Baganeer. So you can just pop over and choose which strap treatment you'd like for your bag. This one's got a fixed length strap, but you can very easily change it over to a crossbody strap, very, very easily. Now I'm going to sew from the right side because then I know that it will be nice and neat on the right side. And in this case I am going to back stitch just a couple of stitches, and when I get to the other end, back stitch a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to back stitch all the way back along that original line of stitching, just for a bit of extra security. And as I said, rivets are a great optional extra. Again, tutorial for adding rivets, I've got a masterclass on rivets, is on my YouTube channel. I'm not sure whether it's on my Patreon channel or whether it's available for everybody on my YouTube. It is available on my YouTube, which is available for everybody to see, but I'm not sure whether we've added it to Patreon just so it's there in the same place for you. But if you can't find it, have a look on YouTube. Okay, lovely. So that strap is definitely secure. The last thing you want is to be carrying your bag and your strap fail. So make sure that your strap is nice and secure. All right, lovely. So it's time to finish our bag. So gather all of your components up. Might put these pins down here instead, just to be sure. Actually, I've got a whole shelf under my counter. Let's do that. And what we're going to do now is add our strap onto our lining, okay, because this means that it will be less bulky at this point, so a lot easier. So if you've got a right side and a wrong side, you are going to want to add it. Hang on, let's have a look. Let's turn the lining right sides out as the pattern has it so that we can not get too confused. Okay, and we want the right side of the strap to be facing up. So if you've got a right and a wrong side, there's my wrong side, so that's going to be facing down onto the lining. We're going to match up. You can just see inside your strap tabs where the center is, where we've folded the edges into the center. So I'm going to line that up with that side seam on the lining. Okay, and then flip it under and around to make sure that it's not twisted. and we'll attach this one to this side. Okay, and all I'm doing at this point is just basting it into place. I'm going to, unfortunately, because I've got a flatbed, it's a little bit awkward sewing these kinds of things unless it's turned inside out. Once it's turned inside out, it's absolutely fine. Okay, so we're just going to baste these into place. I am going to backstitch because, as I said, a bit of extra security on your straps is never a bad thing. So just backstitch there and then whiz across the top and a backstitch there. Okay, and then the same on the other side. And we'll backstitch at the start and across the top and backstitch at the end as well. Lovely. Okay, so our strap is attached. We don't have to worry too much about that. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is just double check that everything's still open. So our turning gap is still open, our turning gap in the zip pocket is still open. Is the zip still open? Yes, the zip is still open. Okay, retrieve your exterior and we're going to pop these all together then and finish our bag. Okay, so to finish the bag we need our lining right sides out. I know it feels like there's a lot of turning in and out, but actually for you there won't be. It's because I've got a flatbed machine, so I have to turn one in and out. Okay, so we should have our exterior wrong sides out, our lining right sides out, and we're going to pop the lining inside the exterior. So decide what side of your lining you want to be the back and what you want to be the front. You might want the full width slip pocket to be the back, in which case place that matching the flap. If you want your zip pocket to be on the back, which I'm going to do, pop that in with the zip pocket on the same side as the flap. So you can see here I've got my zip pocket and my flap matching each other, and the thing that we're going to match up first is our center marks. Okay, so match your center mark there, and then on the other side match your center marks on that side, and then on the side edges make sure that everything's tucked down inside. Your strap and your flap are nicely tucked in. I'm going to match our seam lines on the side there and add a clip, and then on the other side, and I've started looking around for my clips and I've just remembered I put them underneath, didn't I? Okay, if you've got fabric that can take pins, then I would recommend doing this bit, these 4 points, with pins, because it will just keep them in place. And these are the 4 sort of immovable points, if you like, to make sure that your lining is perfectly aligned. So all we're going to do is work our way around the top, just making sure that it's all evenly spaced, smoothing everything down. All the way around. And this bit at the front where it's less bulky, I'm actually going to leave that as my starting point for where I'm sewing. Okay, beautiful. So everything else is tucked down inside, strap, flap, lining, everything's tucked down inside. The only things that I'm going to be sewing is the seam allowance around the top of the bag there. I might add a little pin. Just hold that together because that's where we're going to sew. Okay, right, so for you, if you've got a free arm, then pop it on your free arm and sew around the top. For me, I've got a flatbed, so I'm going to be sewing inside my bag. Okay, so I'm going to be popping it in here and sewing around the inside with my press foot on the inside. Oh, I've put my pin on back to front there. I did wonder if I had. There we go. Now, make sure that your machine is on your regular construction stitch length, whatever it is that you use to construct your bags, and get that bulk of that bag under your presser foot and pop your presser foot down. I've lost a clip there. Let's add that back on again. Okay, so for me with my flatbed, as you can see, I'm sewing inside the bag. So I'm going to start with my needle down, and I could back stitch. Let's back stitch, and I'm just going to slowly sew around the entire top of the bag. Just take your time. Make sure to maintain that seam allowance of 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch as we go around. Take your time, especially as you go over the strap tabs and as we come to where the flap starts and ends, okay, because that is a little bit bulkier. Just manoeuvre your bag around so you can sew around the entire top. Make sure that anything that's under your presser foot is nice and flat, and then we won't get any puckers or wrinkles. And I'm nearly back to the start. Just overlapping a few stitches and back stitching just to be sure. Okay, I'll trim these threads, and then I'm going to have a little look all around and just double check that my stitching is okay. A little bit uncertain here whether I've gone inside the basting stitches, so I'll just have a quick look. Yeah, I can't see any basting stitches, so we should be okay, but I'll have a look on this side of the flap as well just to be sure. Yeah, all okay. Right, great. Oh well, I suppose that's the next job anyway, is turning out, so I might as well get started on that, seeing as I've already started. So we're turning out through the gap in the lining in the base there, okay, and again, take your time doing this, just ease it out, especially if you're using something like faux leather or vinyl or cork or something that's a little bit bulky. Just take your time and ease that out nice and gently. All the way. Okay, lovely. Whew, right, okay. So, just get the exterior pulled out as well. We should get a little bit of a look here at what our bag is going to look like then, our finished bag. Take everything out. Make sure those corners are pushed out really well. Got a loose thread there. How did I manage that when I was trying so hard to snip all of my threads? Not entirely sure. There's always one there, isn't there? Okay, just gonna push those corners out on that side as well. Lovely. And another loose thread. Maybe there's, oh, there's two here. Maybe there's always two or three. Wonder if there's one that side as well. There is one that side. They obviously like to hang around by strap tabs. Okay, now where I've opened my seam allowances here at the side, can you see where we've opened our seam allowances, where the strap tabs are? I'm holding that with my thumbs on this side and my fingers, and I'm just ensuring they stay open as I push them down inside. And if I was using cotton, I would pin that into place, but because I'm using vinyl, I'm just going to add a couple of clips just to train that a little bit where the side seam is, and I'll do the same on this side as well. Just want to make sure that that's folded perfectly into place. Okay, beautiful. Oh, and another thread. I obviously wasn't as good at trimming threads as I thought I was. Right. Okay, great. So that's fine. My snap does fit, so that's great. Now what we need to do is close the turning gap in the lining first. Okay, so we can pull our lining out, and what we're going to do is reach through the zip pocket, because remember we've got the zip pocket open as well. I'm going to reach through the zip pocket and pull that lining out of the zip pocket. Okay, so that's my main lining here coming out through the bottom of the zip pocket. And I'm just going to clip that. You can press this if you'd like to. If it's a bit wibbly and ruckled, give that a nice press, that's fine. And we're going to close that up by using our regular stitch length and the same seam allowance we used for our lining, which is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. And I'm going to back stitch at the start, and I'm just overlapping a little bit where the turning gap started so that I don't have any holes, because if you've got a little hole you'll inevitably lose something down there, won't you? Or I do anyway. So I'm just sewing along that original stitch line again, that seam line. Snipping my threads in an attempt to not have too many loose threads. Okay, and just double check that that lining is all nice and as it should be at this point. I've got a loose thread inside my lining, you know. Okay, so that looks great as far as we are, and I just need to close the turning gap in the zip pocket now. So I'll pull my zip pocket out and just fold in under the corners there. And then I'm folding along that original line of stitch holes to fold these seam allowances under. Okay, and then I'm just going to clip that into place just to hold it in place. You can match your centres if you like. You might find that they're slightly not 100% quite right, but maybe nearly. And just clip that all the way along. Now if you'd like to close this properly, then you can use a ladder stitch by hand, and that will form an invisible close. However, I am going to just whiz it through the sewing machine on a close machine top stitch, because as we talked about earlier, I absolutely detest hand sewing and I'm terrible at it. So I'm just going to back stitch a little bit. And this is inside the zip pocket as well, so it's not hugely important for it to be invisible and immaculate. But if you like things to be very, very neat, then that is a great option for you. Okay, sewing all the way along, back stitch at the end. There we go. Just double check I've caught everything, yep. And then we can push that back into the zip pocket. Make sure the lining is fully in place. Now, I find that until all the turning gaps are closed, everything sits slightly odd, not quite right. Okay, so our lining is all finished. All we need to do now is top stitch around the outside of the bag. If you compress your fabric, then I would recommend that you do have a good press around the top of the bag before you do your top stitching. Unfortunately I can't, so I'm just gonna finger roll my lining fabric down inside and clip, and then I'm going to leave this clipped, go off and get a pasty, I think, because I do live in Cornwall after all. And then I'm going to come back and top stitch it after I've had some deliciousness, really. Okay, so I've folded that down nice and neat. If I could pin this, then I would also pin the back there, just to make sure that my lining stayed down nice and neat inside. Can't, so I'm just going to pin the front bit there, and then when I come back do my top stitching, and then that's our ultimate shoulder bag complete. I can't wait to use this bag. Actually, I'll show it off. I don't know if I will use it, actually. It's too gorgeous. I might have to just sit and look at it for a while, I think. I do like it. Right, so I've left that clipped, and I will go and get my pasty, and I'll come back and top stitch this in a little bit. So see you in a bit. Okay, in true flatbed style, not flatbread, obviously got flatbread on the mind, flatbed style, I've turned my bag inside out again so that I can top stitch on my exterior fabric, but with my presser foot inside the bag. So my needle, my presser foot will be on the exterior of the bag, but I'm obviously sewing it from inside. I'm just going to change my needle over while I think about it, so I can pop a nice fresh needle in, ready to top stitch, which I think when you're using an unknown vinyl is always a sensible idea, just in case. Okay, there we go. Right, so I am going to increase my stitch length to my top stitching stitch length. I want a bit of extra wiggle space, and I'm probably going to start just before the back here, or in the back, so that I can almost hide my start and stop point. And my clips may go pinging off everywhere as I pull this through, but that's okay because they've done their job and they flattened things nicely. Right, so to get my foot in, just need to lift up my presser foot as high as it will go and wiggle myself into space. Into the space. I suppose into space works as well. Okay. So I'm going to start with my needle down. I've got my long stitch length on for my top stitching, and I'm using an 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance. I'm sewing from the edge, and as I go I'm just going to be pulling my fabric away from this top seam, my exterior and my lining fabric, just to make sure that it's down nice and neat. Take your time doing this, okay? This is not something that we want to rush. Okay, and as I come up towards where my strap tabs are, I'm just readjusting so I can make sure that everything is positioned nice and neat under the presser foot. And sewing straight across these strap tabs, making sure that they are pulled out nice and taut from that top seam. And then as you come round onto the front, just make sure to take it nice and steady, nice and neat. Just wriggle everything out of the way however you need to, manipulate your fabric out of the way so that you sew in exactly where you want to be sewing. Right, before I get back there, I'm just going to pull my top thread through to the back with my bobbin thread and tie them off before I get there, and then I've only got the threads at the end to worry about. So I'm just tying these threads off here at the back on the lining side so that they're done and gone and out of the way. Okay. Then I can carry on round and I'm nearly back to the start then. Okay. Right, back to the start, finished off. So let's cut these threads. I'll pull them through to the back, tie them off like I did before, if I can. Nearly. Let's get a little pin, see if I can pull it. There we go. I think I've got it. Got something. No, I've got half of something. I'm not sure how I managed that. Right, back to the needle. We did have a needle, didn't we? There we go. Okay, so let's thread it through to the back. Instead, thread it through one of my existing holes. There we go. The things we do for a nice neat finish, eh? Right, so I'll tie those two off. My bag will need a nice press when we're done. I can see my lining fabric is a bit wrinkly already. Okay, beautiful. Now for you, you won't need to do this because your bag should be the right way round already. For me, just turn my bag the right way round. Yeah, definitely going to need a little press, isn't it? Been a little bit rough on my bag. I think it should recover pretty well though. Okay, so just push my corners out, make sure those are all out nice and neat. Make sure the lining's pushed down neatly inside. And there we go. The bag is complete. The ultimate shoulder bag. I absolutely love the shape of this one. I think it's great. I think it's such a practical bag. And as I said, you can change it. You can have different strap option. You can have pockets. You can add pockets onto the back. You can have a full width slip pocket on the back there. You can add feet. You can add extra bling. Whatever you want, really. I think that's a very practical bag. I wasn't worried then that I had my strap twisted, but I'm all right. And I quite like that the strap is in the contrast. It's in the lining fabric. I really, really do hope that you make one of these because I think they're gorgeous. I think they're so practical. If you do make one, I would love to see it. So please do tag me at the Makespace or drop us an email. Contact us via the website or through Patreon. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much for sewing along with me. Thank you for joining me, and thank you again for your support. Please do tag us in any photos that you share. I'd love to see them. Bye bye.